A millionaire falls in love with a virtual girlfriend. When he meets her for the first time, he uncovers a shocking truth. Before starting the story, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Everyone. Victor Campbell, CEO of the giant Campbell Innovations, was a man used to winning. His life revolved around billion. A very rich man falls in love with a woman he meets online. When he finally meets her in person, he learns something shocking. Before the story starts, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Everyone. Victor Campbell, the CEO of the giant Campbell Innovations, was a man used to making billions of dollars and making quick decisions. At home, there was one challenge he couldn't escape: his mother. Evelyn. It's time you got married. You're a powerful man. Without a wife, your life is incomplete. Victor ignored his family's pressure. Tired of the constant arguments, he did something unexpected. He created an anonymous profile on a dating app and introduced himself. He was determined to escape his family's pressure to get married. He felt his life was incomplete without a wife. He ignored the family pressures. He was tired of the constant arguments. So, he created an anonymous profile on a dating app and introduced himself as Ethan. His goal was simple: to avoid sharing any details of his real life. He wanted to silence Evelyn with the false promise that he was looking for someone. In the first week, most conversations felt superficial until he received a message from Luna. She had a sharp sense of humor and a captivating way of talking. Within days, their exchanges became frequent, devolving into long, late-night conversations. As Ethan, he didn't share any details about his real life. His goal was simple: not tell Evelyn the truth and say he was looking for someone. In the first week, most conversations felt superficial until he received a message from Luna. She had a sharp sense of humor and a captivating way of talking. Within days, their exchanges became frequent, turning into long, late-night conversations. "You're different from anyone I've ever met, Luna," Victor typed. "Maybe because I'm not trying to impress anyone. Maybe I'm just not trying to impress anyone," she replied, adding a winking emoji. Luna, whose real name was Alice Harper, was a freelance graphic designer. She dreamed of working for a big company. Between projects and tight deadlines, her chats with Ethan became the highlight of her day. She felt a genuine connection, something she'd never experienced before. One evening, during their conversation, Ethan proposed something unexpected. "What do you think about? You think about meeting in person? It's time we turn these messages into something real." Alice hesitated. Meeting someone from the virtual world was risky. Her intuition told her Ethan was trustworthy. "Let's do it," she replied, her heart racing. Meanwhile, Victor, more excited than he would admit, picked a date for their meeting. It would be a quiet dinner, far from the prying eyes of the media. He wanted to meet her without the interference of his corporate world. What he didn't know was that fate had even more complex plans. The two. Alice Harper was thrilled. After graduating from college with a degree in graphic design, she had always wanted to work for a well-known company. So, when she got an email from Campbell Innovations asking her to come in for an interview, she was amazed. This could be the chance she needed to make a change in her life. She looked over her portfolio many times, making sure that every project was perfect. Even though she had a meeting with Ethan planned for that same evening. She made the interview her top priority. After all, getting this job would mean leaving the small town and finally living in the big city. Freelance jobs that barely paid enough to cover her expenses. On the morning of the interview, Alice put on her favorite navy blue blazer. The one that made her look confident. Looking at herself in the mirror, she repeated to herself, "You've got this." Meanwhile, in the fancy office on the top floor of Campbell Innovations, Victor Campbell was reviewing the day's schedule. He had a series of important meetings. One item in particular caught his eye, the interview with a new designer named Alice Harper. Victor rarely got involved in the work of less experienced designers. Level hired her. Something about her name intrigued him. When his assistant, Rebecca, came in to confirm the schedule, he asked her casually, "Is Harper local?" "Yes, sir. She graduated with honors and distinction. She seems promising." Victor nodded. Thoughtful. Something about that name stirred something within him. He decided to ignore it. He had more pressing matters to deal with. Like his meeting with Luna that evening. Later, Alice arrived at the impressive Campbell Innovations building. The heart of the city's technology. The environment was scary. Shiny glass walls, hurried employees, and a security system like in a futuristic movie. Name, asked the security guard. "Alice Harper, I have an interview at 10. After checking her name, he told her to go to the 20th floor. Alice took a deep breath as the elevator went up. Her heart was beating very fast. When the doors opened, Rebecca greeted her with a professional smile. "The CEO will see you shortly. Please have a seat." Alice froze. The CEO. She had expected to. She was interviewed by a design manager. Not the company's leader himself. She tried not to show her nerves. She nodded and sat in the elegant waiting area. Moments later, Rebecca opened the door to Victor's office. "Mr. Campbell. Ms. Harper is here," Rebecca said. Victor, standing with his back to the door and gazing at the city view, turned slowly. The moment his eyes met Alice's, they both froze. Alice swallowed hard, immediately recognizing Ethan. He was the man she had spoken with every night, who made her laugh and dream. He was her future boss. Victor felt very scared. Luna, the woman who had caught his attention and made him feel safe, was standing right in front of him. "Alice," he said, his voice barely audible. Alice blinked, trying to understand what was happening. "Ethan, no." Her voice faltered as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The silence between them was very loud. Victor, who was usually calm, felt his mask slipping. He knew he needed to regain control of the situation. "Ms. Harper," he finally said, taking on a professional tone. "Please have a seat." Alice obeyed, though her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely think. She had come in for an interview. Now she was face to face with the man who knew her most intimate secrets. Victor tried to stay calm. His mind was in chaos. He wanted to talk to Alice. "Take a seat, Alice." She did as she was told. Her heart was racing. She had come in for a job interview. Now she was face to face with the man who knew her most intimate secrets. Victor tried to stay calm. His mind was in chaos. He wanted to talk to Alice. He knew he couldn't. The situation was delicate. One wrong move could jeopardize his position as CEO. "Let's begin," he said, flipping through Alice's portfolio. Alice answered his questions as professionally as possible. The tension was unmistakable. Every word exchanged seemed loaded with meaning. As if they were Ethan knew he couldn't do it. The situation was delicate. One wrong move could jeopardize his position as CEO. "Let's begin," he said, flipping through Alice's portfolio. Alice answered his questions as professionally as possible. The tension was unmistakable. Every word exchanged seemed loaded with meaning. As if they were walking on thin ice. After what felt like an eternity, Victor ended the interview. "Thank you, Ms. Harper. We'll be in touch." Alice nodded and left the office quickly, feeling the weight of the situation. As soon as the elevator doors closed, her mind exploded with questions. How could he have hidden something so important? Now what? Victor, meanwhile, remained seated, staring at the door through which Alice had just exited. He knew he had to decide how to handle this unexpected turn of events. Alice walked through the city streets, still in shock. What was supposed to be a simple interview had turned into an emotional whirlwind. Ethan. The kind and funny the man who made her smile was Victor Campbell. The serious and controlling CEO of Campbell Innovations. She felt betrayed. She also knew it wasn't fair to judge him without understanding his reasons. In his fancy office, Victor stared out at the horizon. His thoughts mixed together. As a CEO, he was used to making decisions. The man who made her smile was Victor Campbell, the serious and controlling CEO of Campbell Innovations. She felt betrayed. She also knew it wasn't fair to judge him without understanding his reasons. In his luxurious office, Victor stared out at the horizon. His thoughts tangled. As a CEO, he was used to making calculated decisions. Nothing had prepared him for this. Luna Alice was real. Now the virtual world they had shared was colliding with the professional one. Victor knew he needed to act. He called Rebecca and asked her to bring Alice back to the office. Alice, still trying to process everything, received the call just as she was thinking about not working at the company anymore. Demar Campbell would like to see you again, Rebecca said formally. Alice reluctantly returned to the building. Once she arrived, she was taken straight to Victor's office that he was standing by the window, waiting for her. "Alice," he began, his voice calm but tense. "That we need to talk." She crossed her arms, standing firm. "Go ahead." Victor took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "That I never planned for things to get to this point. That I created the profile on the app because my mother insisted. Our conversations were real to me." Alice narrowed her eyes, analyzing his every word. "And what about?" Victor understood that Alice was real. That her presence in the virtual world was now affecting the professional one. He knew he needed to do something. He called Rebecca and asked her to bring Alice back to the office. "Alice, I need you to come back to the office right now," Victor said. "Victor, did you know who I was?" Alice asked, surprised. "No. Not until today when you walked through that door," Victor replied, his gaze sincere. There was a long silence between them, filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, Alice let out a long sigh. "This doesn't change the fact that you're my boss now. Honestly, I don't know how to handle this," Alice said. Victor nodded. Victor understood her dilemma. "Neither do I. I want to make one thing clear: our conversations Everything we shared. They were real. Alice shook her head. Still confused. Something in his voice made her believe him. Fine. We need to keep things professional from now on. Victor agreed. Though he knew it wouldn't be that easy. Simple. The next day, Alice officially started her job at Campbell Innovations. Despite the initial discomfort, she threw herself into her projects, determined to prove her worth. Victor, meanwhile, kept his distance. He tried to maintain his role as CEO. He couldn't help glancing toward the design department, where Alice worked diligently. During a design team meeting, Victor decided to personally review the progress on their projects. Alice was presenting her ideas when he walked into the room. The atmosphere instantly grew tense. She held her composure and continued. This concept aims to connect users through an intuitive interface. Victor had made a plan. He wasn't ready for what happened next. Luna Alice was real. Now the virtual world they had shared was mixing with the professional one. Victor knew he had to do something. He called Rebecca and asked her to bring Alice back to the office. Alice was still trying to understand everything. She received the call just as she, focusing on accessibility and clean design. Alice explained, pointing to the screen. Victor listened closely and, at the end of the presentation, asked, "Can you deliver this in a week?" Alice knew it was a tight deadline. She was determined. "Yes. I can." Victor nodded. The meeting ended. As everyone left the room, he approached her. "Alice. Can we talk?" She hesitated. She agreed. "Of course. Mr. Campbell." Victor frowned slightly at her formal tone. He didn't comment. "I just wanted to thank you for your dedication. I know the situation is unusual. I hope we can work together without it affecting our performance." Alice looked. Victor had made a plan. He wasn't ready for what happened next. Luna Alice was real. Now the virtual world they had shared was mixing with the professional one. Victor knew he had to do something. He called Rebecca and asked her to bring Alice back to the office. Alice was still trying to understand everything. She received the call. For a moment, she looked at him before saying, "I hope so too." The following days were hard. Alice worked non-stop to meet the deadline. Victor struggled to balance his feelings and responsibilities. There was a clear tension between them. Neither one wanted to show more than necessary. Finally, the deadline arrived. Alice delivered the project on time. During the final presentation, Victor surprised everyone by publicly praising her work. "Excellent work, Ms. Harper. This is the level of innovation we strive for at Campbell Innovations." Alice felt her cheeks flush. She thanked him professionally. After the meeting, Rebecca handed her a note. "Meet me on the rooftop at 6. We need to talk." Alice thought about not going. She was curious and wanted to solve the situation. She went to the rooftop. When she arrived, Victor was already there, looking at the city lights. "I thought you wouldn't come." "I'm here. What do you want?" Victor finally turned and looked at her. "I just want you to know that, despite everything, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable here. If needed, I can request to transfer you to another team." Alice crossed her arms, thinking, his words won't be necessary. I can keep things professional. Victor nodded. His expression revealed something else. "Then let's make this work." Alice simply nodded. Sensing this was only the beginning of something far more complicated. The next days at Campbell Innovations tested Alice's patience. While determined to stay professional, it was impossible to ignore Victor's constant presence. He attended meetings, reviewed every detail of the project, always asked pointed questions. In the third meeting that week, Victor interrupted Alice's mid-presentation. "This concept needs to be bolder. Where are the ideas that surprise us?" he asked firmly, his gaze critical. Alice took a deep breath, holding back her irritation. "The goal here is to deliver functionality and aesthetics. If you stray too far from that, you compromise the user experience." Victor stared at her for a few seconds before replying. "Redo it. Presentation. This concept needs to be bolder. Where are the ideas that surprise us?" he asked firmly, his gaze critical. Alice took a deep breath, holding back her irritation. "The goal here is to deliver functionality and aesthetics. Straying too far from that compromises the user experience." Victor stared at her for a few seconds before replying. "Redo it with more options. I want something different on my desk by tomorrow." The silence in the room was palpable. Alice nodded calmly, though inside she felt her frustration rising. When the meeting ended, she left quickly, ignoring her colleagues' glances. Back at her desk, Alice began working. Victor's words echoed in her mind. The man she had shared late, with more options. "I want something different on my desk by tomorrow." The silence in the room was obvious. Alice nodded calmly, though inside she felt her frustration rising. When the meeting ended, she left quickly, ignoring her colleagues' glances. Back at her desk, Alice began working. Victor's words echoed in her mind. The man she had shared late-night messages with felt like a completely different person now. Later, while reviewing sketches, she heard footsteps approaching. It was Sarah, a teammate. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her expression kind. "I'm fine. Just trying to handle our dear CEO's expectations." Alice replied sarcastically. Sarah laughed. "He's demanding. I've heard that when he likes someone's work, he's a strong ally." Alice sighed. "I hope that's true." Meanwhile, in Victor's office, he stared at the weekly report. His mind was elsewhere. He knew he had been hard on Alice. He thought it was necessary to maintain boundaries between his personal and professional lives. Even so, part of him felt guilty. Rebecca entered with a reminder, "Mr. Campbell, the design team's performance report is ready. Would you like me to bring it?" Victor shook his head. "Not now. Leave me alone for a..." As soon as Rebecca left, Victor picked up his phone. He felt like sending a message to Alice. Maybe Luna. He wanted to explain. He knew he shouldn't. The next day, Alice delivered the revised project on time. Victor reviewed the sketches in silence. When he finished, he simply said, "Much better. Continue down this path." Alice felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. She knew she needed to keep her head up and prove herself. She was ready for anything that might come up that night. As Alice looked over more details of the project, she got a message from Ethan. "How was your day? You seemed tired lately." She looked at the screen, feeling a little annoyed. After pausing for a moment, she replied, "I had to deal with a demanding boss. Nothing I can't handle. Ethan responded quickly. I'm sure you'll handle it. You're amazing. Alice closed her eyes for a moment, trying to separate the man who supported her online from the boss who pushed her hard at work. The next day, something unexpected happened. During lunch, Victor was in the company cafeteria, which was a rare occurrence. Alice walked in and tried to avoid eye contact. Ended up sitting near him. As she ate, Sarah approached and started chatting loudly about the project. Alice. You're doing great. I bet even the grumpy boss is impressed. Sarah said, laughing. Alice let out a nervous laugh. Victor heard it and frowned. He didn't say anything. It was clear he had heard. After lunch, Victor called Alice to his office. Miss Harper. Can you explain the jokes from lunch? He asked in a serious tone. Alice felt her face flush. It was nothing. Sir. It was just a casual conversation with a colleague. Make sure your team knows that jokes like that are unacceptable in the workplace. Victor said. Curtly. Alice left his office with shaking hands, feeling treated unfairly. Later that night, Alice told Ethan. My boss called me into his office today because of a joke I told at lunch. He's unbearable. Maybe he's just trying to maintain order. Ethan replied, Alice. Scoffed. Irritated. Maintain order. All he does is criticize and set impossible deadlines. Have you considered that he might have a good reason for that? Alice stopped for a moment, surprised by the answer. I don't know. She thought he should be more human. On the other side of the screen, Victor read the message and sighed deeply. He wanted to explain himself. He knew it would make things more complicated. In the next few days, Alice and Victor barely spoke to each other. They were very professional. The tension between them was clear. The whole team could feel it. Alice's first week at Campbell Innovations was very busy. She had a lot of work to do and her boss Victor was always demanding. But she knew this was her chance to do her best. She didn't want to be distracted. The next Monday, Victor called a meeting with the design team. He wanted to show them the new project, a redesign of the company's main app. It was a big task. Victor said they had only 2 weeks to complete it. He said it was the most important project of the quarter. He spoke in his usual authoritative tone. Everyone, do your best. He looked around the room and stopped at Alice. Miss Harper. You'll be responsible for the main visual concept. Are you ready? Alice felt the weight of responsibility. Answered firmly, yes. Sir. As soon as the meeting ended, Alice dove into work. 4 hours. She sketched and adjusted details, determined to impress. However, Victor's critiques came quickly. This still isn't what I'm looking for, he said. Reviewing her initial concepts. Refine the lines. Alice tried to focus more on the user experience. She felt frustrated. She went back to the drawing board. However, she was starting to feel tired. Meanwhile, Victor watched from a distance. He wanted to help her. He knew he shouldn't let his personal feelings get in the way of his work. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. That night, Alice stayed at the office late. The team had already left. She needed to make changes to deliver something good the next day. When she looked at the clock, She realized it was past 9. Suddenly, the office door opened and Victor walked in. He was walking with firm steps. "Still here?" he asked. Surprised. "Yes. I want to make sure the project meets your expectations," Alice replied, not taking her eyes off the monitor. Victor stepped closer, looking at her work over her shoulder. "It's better," he admitted. "But you need to rest. You've been working endlessly. I can't promise great results." A moment. Alice felt the tension ease. "It's funny hearing that from you, considering you never stopped working." Victor gave a slight smile but quickly returned to a serious tone. "I'm the CEO. It's expected that I keep this pace. I'm expected to deliver something perfect." "Right," Alice retorted, turning to face him. They stared at each other for a few seconds until Victor stuck back. "I'll get some coffee. You won't finish this without an extra dose of energy." Alice was surprised by the gesture, made her smile and say, "Thank you." The next day, Alice showed the updated visual concept in a meeting. The room went quiet as Victor looked closely at every detail. After a few minutes, he turned to the team and said, "Excellent work, Miss Harper. This is the kind of innovation I want to see." Alice felt a wave of relief and pride. The first time, she realized she might be able to handle Victor's high expectations. However, not everything went smoothly. During lunch break, Alice overheard some colleagues talking. "It seems like the boss is interested in the new designer," one of them said, laughing. "Did you see how he praised her work? That's rare for him." Alice ignored the comments. She thought about what they said. She knew she'd need to act professional to avoid any speculation. Later in the office, Victor called Alice in to discuss final adjustments to the project. His tone was lighter than usual. "Have a seat. I want to go over a few ideas to improve the concept." Even more, she saw that he was acting differently. She decided to pay attention to the conversation. During the discussion, she realized that, even though Victor was strict, he was smart and knew exactly what he wanted. "This could work," she said, after thinking about some of the changes. "I agree. If you need help, let me know. Don't be afraid to ask for help." Alice was surprised. She just nodded. As she walked back to her desk, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Victor wasn't just demanding, he was also very particular about the details. She admired how dedicated he was, even if she didn't want to admit it. That evening, Alice received another message from Ethan. "How's the project coming along?" She hesitated before responding. "It's going well. My boss finally approved my work. He's still a mystery to me." On the other side of the screen, Victor smiled faintly. "Maybe he's just trying to be fair." Alice laughed as she read the message. "If that's fairness, I never wanted to be judged again." Victor typed a response but hesitated before sending it. He knew the line. The lines between Ethan and Victor's roles were becoming blurred. He needed to be careful. The next day, Alice and Victor met in the hallway. He did something unexpected. "Miss Harper, thank you for the extra effort. Your work has exceeded expectations." Alice was momentarily speechless. Quickly replied, "Thank you, Mr. Campbell, I'll keep giving my best." Victor nodded and walked away. The small compliment was enough to make Alice feel like she was in some way earning her place. The week flew by. leaving Alice exhausted but satisfied. The project was going well. She was starting to feel more confident at Campbell Innovations. Still, she felt worried about her relationship with Victor. One moment he was cold and critical. The next kind and understanding. That Friday, Alice left the office a bit early, looking forward to her dinner with Ethan. She was excited to finally meet the man who had been her virtual companion for months. Tonight, everything would make sense. She murmured to herself as she chose a dress while Alice was getting ready. Victor was reviewing an important report in his office. Investor pressure. He was getting ready to leave for work. He knew that the project he was working on would be very important for the company's future. He was thinking about the numbers until Rebecca came in. "Mr. Campbell. You have an emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. Victor frowned. It wasn't on the agenda. It was scheduled last minute. It seems serious. Victor sighed, closing the report. He had other plans for the evening. He knew he couldn't ignore the board. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Alice arrived on time. Ethan wasn't there. She asked for a table and waited, checking her phone occasionally after half an hour with no word. Her patience began to wear thin. Did he back out, she thought. Feeling a mix of he had other plans for the evening. He knew he couldn't ignore the board. Meanwhile, Alice arrived on time at the restaurant. Ethan wasn't there. She asked for a table and waited, checking her phone occasionally. After half an hour with no word, her patience began to wear thin. Did he back out? She thought. Feeling a mix of disappointment and frustration, she sent a short message, "Are you coming?" Victor, in the middle of the meeting, saw the notification but couldn't respond. Time slipped by. When he finally got free, it was too late. He picked up his phone and saw Alice's message, "Sorry. Something urgent came up. Can we reschedule?" Alice read the message and felt, message with a sigh. Of course. As always, she muttered. Closing the app the next day, Alice arrived at the office still upset. Dinner had been the one thing she'd really been looking forward to. Now she felt like she'd wasted her time. To make things worse, Victor seemed colder and more distant than ever during the team meeting. Alice felt disappointed and frustrated. She sent a short message. "Are you coming, Victor?" In the middle of the meeting, saw the notification but couldn't respond. Time slipped by. When he finally got free, it was too late. That he picked up his phone and saw Alice's message. "Sorry. Something urgent came up. Can we reschedule?" Alice read the message with a sigh. Of course. As always, she muttered. Closing the app the next day, Alice arrived at the office still upset. Dinner had been the one thing she'd really been looking forward to. Now she felt like she'd wasted her time. To make things worse, Victor seemed colder and more distant than ever during the team meeting. Alice felt disappointed and frustrated. She sent a short message. "Are you coming, Victor?" In the middle of the meeting, saw the notification but couldn't respond. Time slipped by. When he finally got free, it was too late. That he picked up his phone and saw Alice's message. "Sorry. Something urgent came up. Can we reschedule?" Alice read the message with a sigh. Of course. As always, she muttered. Closing the app the next day, Alice arrived at the office still upset. Dinner had been the one thing she'd really been looking forward to. Now she felt like she'd wasted her time. To make things worse, Victor seemed colder and more distant than ever during the team meeting. Alice felt disappointed and frustrated. She sent a short message. Are you coming, Victor? In the middle of the meeting. Saw the notification but couldn't respond. Time slipped by. When he finally got free, it was too late. That he picked up his phone and saw Alice's message. Sorry. Something urgent came up. Can we reschedule? Alice read the message with a sigh. Of course. As always, she during the team meeting. Victor pointed out minor flaws in her work. Things she knew weren't worth mentioning. Miss Harper. This detail needs to be revised. That we can't compromise on quality. That he said in an impersonal tone. Alice held back the urge to respond defensively. She just nodded and went back to work. At lunch, Alice ran into Sarah, who immediately he noticed her gloomy mood. What's wrong? Sarah joked. Long story, Alice replied, not wanting to get into details. Sarah leaned in closer, clearly curious. Does this have to do with the boss? I heard he's been giving you a hard time lately. Alice sighed and shook her head. He was tough. I'm starting to think he's doing it on purpose. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Who knows, maybe he's testing you. Maybe he's trying to push you to do better. Alice didn't answer. Instead, her thoughts drifted back to Ethan. Why had he cancelled dinner? Why did it feel like both he and Victor were determined to complicate things? Her life. That night, Alice told Ethan again. My day was awful. Honestly. I expected better from you. Ethan took a while to reply. Eventually wrote back. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I was caught up in something I couldn't avoid. You could have at least told me beforehand. Alice responded. On the other side of the screen, Victor felt the weight of her words. He knew he was treading on thin ice. Still replied. You're right. There's no excuse. Can I make it up to you? Alice hesitated before typing back. I don't know. We'll see. At the office, Victor was more pensive than ever. He knew he needed to redeem himself. Wasn't sure how to do it without. Alice was upset. She had been looking forward to dinner. Now she felt like she had wasted her time. Things were made even more complicated with Victor. The next morning, Victor walked into the design department without saying hello. He stopped by Alice's desk and placed a report on it. Miss Harper. Here is the detailed feedback on the project. Take your time to review it. Alice was surprised by his controlled tone. Just nodded. Yes. Sir. Before leaving, Victor paused and said something unexpected. Good work on the last presentation. You're on the right track. Alice blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. It wasn't much. Coming from him. It meant something. That night, Ethan sent another message. I'm still thinking of how to make it up to you, Annie. She let out a soft chuckle, feeling her irritation fade. Surprise me, she said. Victor read the message and felt there might still be a chance to earn back Alice's trust. Alice was determined not to let either Victor or Ethan upset her. The past few days had been an emotional roller coaster. She let out a deep sigh. As always, she muttered, closing the app. The next day, Alice arrived at the office. Still upset. She had been looking forward to dinner. Now she felt like she had wasted her time. To make matters worse, Victor seemed colder and more distant than ever. During the team meeting, she wanted to focus solely on her work. But that was easier said than done. Especially with Victor constantly watching every detail of the project. That afternoon, during a team meeting, Alice presented a new design proposal for the app. Victor listened silently, his eyes fixed on each slide. When she finished, he paused for a moment before saying, "It's close. We need more visual impact on the homepage. Can you work on that?" Alice nodded, keeping her tone steady. "Of course, Mr. Campbell." Despite the professional exchange, Alice felt the tension rise with every interaction. After the meeting, as she walked back to her desk, Sarah pulled her aside. "You're doing a great job dealing with the boss," Sarah said playfully. "I'm just trying to survive," Alice replied with a sigh. Later that night, Alice got another message from Ethan. "Have you decided how you want me to surprise you?" She rolled her eyes. She couldn't help smiling. "I don't know. Maybe a decent dinner." "You're doing a great job dealing with the boss," Sarah said playfully. "I'm just trying to survive," Alice replied with a sigh. Later that night, Alice got another message from Ethan. "Have you decided how you want me to surprise you?" She rolled her eyes. Couldn't help smiling. "I don't know. Maybe a decent dinner. This time. No cancellations." Ethan replied almost immediately. "Deal. Let's do it right this time." Alice felt her heart skip a beat. Despite all the ups and downs, there was something about Ethan that made her want to give him another chance. The next day, Alice was focused on refining the project when she received an Ethan replied almost immediately. "Deal. Let's do it right this time." Alice felt her heart skip a beat. Despite all the ups and downs, there was something about Ethan that made her want to give him another chance. The next day, Alice was focused on refining the project when she received an email from Victor. "Meeting on the rooftop at 4 p.m. We need to discuss design details." She frowned. Meetings on the rooftop weren't typical. She decided not to question it. At 4 p.m., Alice went up to the rooftop and found Victor already waiting. He was standing with his back to her, gazing out at the city below. "Miss Campbell," she called cautiously. Victor turned around. For a moment, he seemed more relaxed than usual. "Thank you for coming. I thought it would be better to talk in a less formal setting." Alice nodded, still wary. "All right. About the design." Victor raised his. He interrupted her. "Before we start, I want to say I'm sorry if I've been too hard on you lately. I know it might seem like I'm always criticizing. It's because I believe in your potential." Alice was surprised by how sincere he was. "Thank you. Sometimes it feels like I'm not good enough." "That's not true," Victor said, looking at her. "Your work has been exceptional. I want you to know that." Alice felt her heart tighten. Seeing Victor was rare. It left her even more confused. That evening, Alice received another message from Ethan. "Ready for our dinner tomorrow?" She thought for a moment before answering yes. "I'm ready," Ethan replied with a smiling emoji. Alice couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to finally meet him. The next day, the office atmosphere felt different. Victor seemed calmer but still focused on the project. Alice, on the other hand, felt torn between her work and the anticipation of her dinner with Ethan. When the workday ended, Alice went straight home, eager to get ready. She chose a simple yet elegant dress and mentally reviewed everything she knew about Ethan. When she arrived at the restaurant, she looked around, searching. Suddenly, Her heart stopped. Victor Campbell was sitting at a nearby table. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a beautiful woman with blonde hair. Smiling as they talked. Alice felt confused and angry. What was he doing there? Who was that woman? Trying to ignore his presence. She sat at a table farther away. Waiting for Ethan to arrive. As time passed, she began to feel uneasy. Finally, Victor stood up and approached her. "What are you doing here?" Alice asked. Trying to stay calm. Her voice showed tension. "I'm waiting for someone." Victor frowned. Before he could say more, the blonde woman joined them. "Who is this?" Victor asked. "A colleague," he replied. Alice felt embarrassed. She kept her cool. "Enjoy your dinner." "Mr. Campbell," Victor said. He hesitated. Then went back to his table. Alice felt like going there had been a mistake. She picked up her phone and saw a message from Ethan. "Sorry. I can't make it tonight." Alice stared at the screen. Shocked. Once again. Ethan had let her down. Leaving the restaurant. The cold night air seemed to match her mood. She felt trapped in a never-ending cycle of broken expectations. Confusion. The next morning, Alice was very determined to focus on her work and forget about her personal problems. However, when she arrived at her desk, she found a note waiting for her. "We need to talk. Rooftop today at noon." She recognized Victor's handwriting immediately and felt nervous. She didn't know what he wanted. She knew this conversation could change everything. Alice hesitated before heading to the rooftop. Victor's note made it clear that he had something important to say. She wasn't sure what to expect. The confusion about Ethan and seeing Victor at the restaurant still worried her. She opened the rooftop door and found him standing there, looking at the city. He seemed lost in thought. When he heard her footsteps, he turned immediately. "Thank you for coming, Alice," Victor said. His voice was low and almost hesitant. "What do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms. Victor took a step toward her but kept his distance. "We need to talk about last night," Alice said. Surprised. "You want to discuss the fact that you saw me at a restaurant, waiting for someone who never." He showed up. Victor took a deep breath. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. From where I stand. It seems pretty straightforward." "Alice. You're frustrating me," she said. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "Alice. There's something you need to know. I'm Ethan." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Alice blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "What?" she finally murmured. Her voice filled with disbelief. "I'm Ethan. The man you've been chatting with every night." Alice took a step back, shaking her head. "No. That doesn't make sense. Ethan is kind and thoughtful. You're a demanding and difficult boss." Victor finished with a sad smile. Alice crossed her arms and looked down at the ground, trying to understand the situation. "Why did you do this? Why hide behind another name?" Victor took another step forward. He kept his voice calm. "When I started using the app, I didn't expect to meet someone like you. That I wanted a real connection without the expectations that come with my name." Alice looked up, her eyes showing anger and hurt. "And now, you want me to just accept this as if it's normal?" Victor sighed. "That I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I needed To be honest with you, Alice felt a lump in her throat. Part of her wanted to shout. Another part couldn't ignore all the conversations they had shared. Why now? Why decide to tell me this right now? Victor looked directly at her. His eyes showing a vulnerability Alice had never seen before. Because I can't keep living this way. To be honest. Alice felt a lump in her throat. Part of her wanted to shout. Another part couldn't ignore all the conversations they had shared. Why now? Why decide to tell me this right now? Victor looked directly at her. His eyes showing a vulnerability Alice had never seen before. Because I can't keep living this lie. And honestly, I don't want to lose the connection we have. Alice turned her gaze away, struggling to hold back tears. I need time, she finally said. Victor nodded, respecting her decision. Okay. I understand. In the following days, the tension between the two of them grew. At the office, Alice barely looked at Victor. He kept his lie. And honestly, I don't want to lose the connection we have. Alice turned her gaze away, struggling to hold back tears. I need time, she said finally. Victor nodded, respecting her decision. Okay. I understand. In the following days, the tension between the two of them grew. At the office, Alice barely looked at Victor. He kept his distance, giving her the space she had asked for. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights reflecting on everything she had learned. Despite feeling betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Ethan, rather Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while reviewing project sketches, she received a message. Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. Alice was given the space she had asked for. She was able to think about everything she had learned. Even though she felt betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Ethan, rather Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while looking at project sketches, she received a message. Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. I don't even know what to call you anymore. Alice hesitated for a moment. She replied, sure. The phone rang. She answered. Hey, said Victor, his voice soft and careful. What do you want? Alice asked, still defensive. I just want to know how you're doing. She laughed without humor. How do you think I'm doing? Confused. Angry. Not sure. Alice was happy about the distance, which gave her the space she had asked for. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights reflecting on everything she had learned. Despite feeling betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Ethan, rather Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while reviewing project sketches, she received a message. Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. If I can trust you. Victor sighed on the other end of the line. I understand. I know it's not fair to ask anything right now. I just want you to know I never lied about how I feel. Alice closed her eyes, letting the silence speak for her. It's hard to believe you, Victor. I know. I'm willing to prove it if you give me a. Alice had the space she needed to think. Thanks to the distance. During this time, she reflected on everything she had learned. She felt betrayed. She also felt grateful for the support Ethan or Victor had given her for months. One night, while looking at project sketches, she received a message. Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. Alice took a deep breath before responding. We'll see. The next morning, Alice arrived at the office ready to work. However, when she entered the meeting room, she found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a letter from Victor. "I know words aren't enough. I want you to know how much our distance." Giving her the space she had asked for. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights reflecting on everything she had learned. Despite feeling betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Ethan, rather Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while reviewing project sketches, she received a message. "Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. Conversations have meant to me. If you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But please know that everything I've done has been because I admire you both as a person and as a professional. Victor." Alice read the letter several times, trying to figure out how she felt. Later, during a break, she ran into Sarah, who noticed the strange Alice was able to think clearly because she was far away. Victor had guessed correctly that Alice had read his letter. "Thank you for reading my letter," Alice said. Surprised. "I figured you'd be too curious to ignore it," Victor replied, smiling slightly. "I'm still confused about what to do," Alice said, sighing. Victor had supported Alice for months. Even though she felt betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much he had supported her. One night, while looking at project sketches, she received a message. "Can I call?" it said. "It's Ethan or Victor." Atmosphere. "Something wrong?" Sarah asked. "No. Just personal stuff," Alice replied. "Well, I hope things get better." "You deserve it," Sarah said, smiling. Alice thanked her and went back to work. She couldn't stop thinking about Victor's letter. That night, as Alice was leaving the office, she found Victor waiting in the lobby. He looked tense but determined. Victor and Alice were able to spend time apart, which was helpful for her. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights thinking about everything she had learned. Even though she felt betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much support Victor had given her for months. One night, while looking at project sketches, she received a message. "Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. Can I walk you out?" Alice hesitated, eventually agreed. As they walked in silence, Victor finally spoke up. "Thank you for reading my letter." Alice looked at him, surprised. "How do you know I read it?" Victor smiled slightly. "I figured you'd be too curious to ignore it." Alice sighed, still confused about what to do. She had the space she needed, thanks to distance. Alice spent her nights thinking about everything she had learned. She felt betrayed. She couldn't ignore how much Ethan, Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while looking at project sketches, she received a message. "Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. Victor. This is also complicated. I know. I'm willing to simplify things if you'll let me." Alice stopped staring at him. "This won't be easy." "I don't expect it to be," he said sincerely. Alice looked down, torn between anger and the desire to give him another chance. "Then prove it's worth it." Victor smiled faintly. Alice was able to get some distance, which gave her the space she had asked for. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights thinking about everything she had learned. Even though she felt betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Ethan, rather Victor, had supported her for months. One night, while looking at project sketches, She received a message. Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor. Seeing an opportunity to regain her trust. The following days were filled with tension at the office. Something subtle had changed. Victor continued to watch Alice from a distance. Careful not to invade the space she clearly needed. Alice, in turn, focused entirely on her work, using her dedication as a distraction from her conflicting thoughts. On Monday, the design department met to present the latest project updates. Alice, feeling more confident, led the presentation with ease. As she explained the changes, Victor watched in silence, taking note of every detail. When she finished, he stood and publicly praised her. Excellent work. Ms. Harper. This is the kind of. Giving her the space she had asked for. Distance allowed Alice to reflect on everything she had learned. Despite feeling betrayed, she couldn't ignore how much Victor had supported her for months. One night, while reviewing project sketches, she received a message, "Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor." Alice was surprised but maintained her composure, responding only with a brief, "Thank you, Mr. Campbell." After the meeting, Sarah pulled her aside with a mischievous smile. "Looks like the boss is finally recognizing you. Maybe he just wants the project delivered on time." "Maybe," Alice replied. She had the space she'd asked for because distance gave it to her. Meanwhile, Alice spent her nights thinking about everything she had learned. She felt betrayed. She couldn't ignore how much support Victor, had given her for months. One night, while looking at project sketches, she received a message. "Can I call? It's Ethan or Victor." Avoiding eye contact, she replied, "Oh. Sure. I'm the next CEO of the company." Sarah joked, laughing as she walked away. Alice shook her head. She couldn't ignore the slight blush on her face. Later that week, Victor asked Alice to review a set of layouts before the final presentation to investors. "I need this on my desk by tomorrow morning," he said, handing her the files. Alice nodded. As she reviewed the documents, she realized she'd need to stay late to make everything perfect. At around 9 p.m., still at the office, Alice heard footsteps approaching. It was Victor, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, placing a cup on her desk. "Alice?" He gave her the files and said, "I'm here to help you with the project." Alice nodded, but as she reviewed the documents, she realized she'd need to stay late to make everything perfect. At around 9 p.m., Alice was still at the office when she heard footsteps approaching. It was Victor, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, placing a cup on her desk. Alice looked at him, surprised but accepted the coffee. "Thank you," she said. Victor pulled up a chair and sat beside her, observing her work. "It's coming along well," he commented in a softer tone than usual. Alice didn't respond immediately. Finally asked, "Why are you here so late?" Victor gave a faint smile. "Because I want this project to succeed. Maybe I wanted to see how you're doing." Alice's heart raced. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen. "I'm fine. Just tired." Victor watched her silently for a moment before saying, "If you need anything, I'll be in my office." Alice nodded without turning around. As soon as he left, She let out a deep sigh. Trying to control her emotions. Alice's heart raced. She kept her eyes on the screen. "I'm fine. Just tired," she said. Victor watched her silently for a moment before saying, "If you need anything, I'll be in my office." Alice nodded without turning around. As soon as he left, she let out a deep sigh. Trying to control the conflicting emotions that arose whenever they were alone. The next morning, Alice delivered the revised layouts before the investor meeting. Victor reviewed every detail while the rest of the team waited in silence. "Excellent work, Ms. Harper. This is exactly what we were looking for," he finally said. Alice felt a wave of relief. The conflicting emotions that arose whenever they were alone. The next morning, Alice delivered the revised layouts before the investor meeting. Victor reviewed every detail while the rest of the team waited in silence. "Excellent work, Ms. Harper. This is exactly what we were looking for," he finally said. Alice felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. Hearing Victor praise her publicly made all the effort worthwhile. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice complied, maintaining a professional demeanor. "I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication. This project," he continued. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice complied, maintaining a professional demeanor. "I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication. This project wouldn't be where it is without you," Victor said sincerely. Alice searched his face for any sign of insincerity. Found only honesty in his eyes. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Campbell. I know that. I want you to know your work is appreciated," he replied. Alice nodded. As she stood to leave, Victor said something unexpected. "I'm still willing to prove I can be someone you can trust." Alice froze for a moment. Then said, "Then keep proving it." That evening, Alice confided in Sarah as they left the office. "He seems to be trying. Don't you think?" Sarah asked. Alice sighed. Hesitant. "Maybe. It's not something that can be fixed overnight." "That's true." Hearing Victor praise her publicly made her happy. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. "Have a seat," he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice did what he said. Staying professional. "I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication on this project. Who knows? Maybe he really deserves a chance." Alice didn't respond. She knew she needed more time to think about everything. A few days later, Victor surprised Alice with an unexpected invitation, a meeting with the client. "I need you to join me." Alice frowned as she read the message. She accepted. On the day of the meeting, Alice felt satisfied. Hearing Victor praise her publicly made all the effort worthwhile. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice complied, maintaining a professional demeanor. "I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication." This project went together to the venue. A discreet restaurant downtown. During the meeting, Victor displayed impressive confidence. Also gave Alice the space to present her ideas. The client was impressed. Alice felt she was beginning to earn everyone's respect. "You did very well today," Victor said as they walked back to the car. Thank you. It was a great opportunity. Alice replied. Victor looked at her. His tone serious. You have more than just talent. You have the potential to be a leader, he said. Alice felt a tightness in her chest at the compliment. Tried to keep her composure. Thank you, Mr. Campbell, she said. On the drive back to the office. The silence between hearing Victor praise her publicly made her happy. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. Have a seat, he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice did what he said. Looking professional. I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication. This project. Theme was comfortable yet full of unspoken meaning. Alice was starting to see that behind Victor's demanding exterior was someone willing to improve and make up for past mistakes. That night, she received a message from Ethan. How was your day? Alice took a while to reply. Finally typed, better than I expected. Ethan responded, Victor was happy with her work. He let her know. Have a seat, he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice sat down. Looking professional. I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication on this project. I'm happy for you. Alice smiled slightly, feeling that the tension was beginning to ease. The next morning, Alice found another handwritten note on her desk. Alice. I know there's still a lot to prove. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust. Thank you for being patient. Victor. I appreciate your efforts. Alice took a few seconds to think about the letter before putting it away in the drawer. Maybe. Just maybe. He really was changing. The atmosphere at the office was starting to improve. Victor knew the storm was still coming. That morning, during a meeting, he received an unexpected message from his mother. Evelyn Campbell, we need to talk. I'll be in your office in an hour. Victor sighed. Already predicting what was to come, Evelyn had never been comfortable with the idea of him being single. Recently her insistence on finding him the perfect wife had become unbearable. Exactly an hour later, Evelyn entered the office. Impeccable as always. With a serious look at her face, Victor. We need to talk about your priorities. He leaned back in his chair, keeping his tone calm. And what would those be? According to you, your personal life. It's unacceptable that a man in your position doesn't have a wife by his side. I've already selected a few options. Victor rubbed his temples. Feeling his hearing Victor praise her publicly made her happy. After the meeting, Victor asked Alice to meet him in his office. Have a seat, he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Alice sat down. Acting professional. I wanted to thank you for your effort and dedication on this project. I'm starting to lose patience. Mom. We've talked about this. I don't need you to pick someone for me. Evelyn ignored his objection and placed a folder on the desk. Here are the profiles. Jennifer Vanderbilt is an excellent choice. She is young, well-mannered, comes from a respectable family. Victor pushed the folder back. I'm not interested. Then who? That designer who works for you. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. I've heard some rumors. Victor remained calm. His gaze hardened. Alice Harper is an exemplary employee. I don't want you interfering in professional matters. Evelyn let out a short laugh. Professional. Don't be naive. Victor. You're exposing yourself. This could ruin your reputation. Victor stood up, ending the conversation. Mom. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Evelyn stared at him for a few seconds before leaving. Made it clear that the topic was things were far from over. Meanwhile, Alice felt the weight of the rumors starting to spread at the office. People were whispering about her closeness with Victor. She did her best to ignore them. Sarah noticed her tension and tried to ease the mood. Don't pay attention to them. If they're talking about you, it's because they're threatened by your talent. Alice smiled faintly. Sarah's words didn't erase her concern. That night, Victor sent Alice a message asking to meet after work. We need to talk. Rooftop. 6 p.m. Alice hesitated. She ended up going. When she arrived, she found Victor waiting. He looked tense. Is something wrong? She asked. Worried. My mom came by today, Victor said. She said some things that could make things more complicated. Alice frowned. What did she say? Victor sighed. She thinks that our closeness could be used against us. She wants me to distance myself from you. Alice felt a mix of anger and frustration. So that's it. You're going to give in? No. Victor said. But I need you to be aware that this could become a problem. Alice crossed her arms and stared at him. I've dealt with tough situations before. I'm not going to deal with this one. I'm going to quit my job because of the rumors. Victor smiled slightly, admiring her determination. And that's exactly why I believe in you. Alice looked away, still feeling mixed emotions. The following days were a mix of tension and progress. Alice immersed herself in her work, while Victor, still dealing with the pressures from Evelyn, tried to stay calm and focused. Both of them knew the situation couldn't continue indefinitely without a resolution. Victor determined to show Alice that he was committed to being honest and making up for his mistakes. He started planning a gesture that would prove his intentions. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to do things that would show her how much she meant to him. On Friday, Alice arrived at the office early, only to find a folder on her desk. Inside were detailed documents about a new project, a graphic design app for freelancers. Something she had always dreamed of developing. Along with the documents, there was a note from Victor. Alice, this project is yours. I want you to lead it as much as you want to. I believe in your talent and want you to know that you'll always have my support. Victor. Alice was frozen. She read the note several times, trying to understand it. A project of her own. This was more than just an opportunity. It was a demonstration of trust. A step that could define her career. Later, during the meeting, Victor formally announced the project and introduced Alice as the leader. Miss Harper has shown exceptional talent. I trust she will lead this project with excellence. He said this in a firm and confident tone. Alice felt like everyone was looking at her. She kept her cool. Thank you for your confidence, Mr. Campbell. I'll do my best after the meeting. After the meeting, Sarah approached her with a smile. You deserve this. It's amazing to see someone's hard work being recognized. Alice thanked her. Deep down, she was still processing Victor's gesture. He truly seemed determined to prove that he trusted her and valued her work. That evening, while Alice was reviewing the project details, she received a message from Ethan. Can I call you? She hesitated. Then she said yes. When she answered, she heard Victor's voice. It was gentle, also strong. Alice, I just wanted to thank you for taking the lead on this project. I know things have been complicated. I want you to know I'm here if you need anything. Alice took a deep breath, trying to study her emotions. Thank you, Victor. And thank you for trusting me. There was a brief pause before Victor responded. I've always trusted you. The next day, Alice and Victor worked together on the final investor presentation. They spent hours fine-tuning details and discussing ideas. The first time in weeks. The tension between them seemed to ease. During a break, Victor offered Alice a cup of coffee. This seems to be becoming a habit, she said, trying to lighten the mood. A habit I don't mind keeping, he replied with a faint smile. Alice couldn't help but smile back. She felt that little by little, the barriers between them were starting to fall. At the end of the day, Victor walked her to the elevator. Thank you for your hard work today. You did a great job. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Victor paused for a second. Before the elevator doors closed, he said, Alice, I'm ready to wait as long as you need. Alice didn't say anything. She thought about his words as the elevator went down. As the project continued, Alice and Victor started talking more often. They tried to keep their conversations strictly professional. Every look and touch seemed to carry an emotional weight that was impossible to ignore. The office atmosphere felt heavy. It was filled with possibilities. Alice was determined to prove her worth. Not just to Victor. To herself. She had been waiting for the chance to lead this project. She refused to let conflicting feelings interfere with her performance. One day, while reviewing a detailed, every look and movement seemed to carry a deep emotional weight. The office atmosphere felt heavy. It was also full of possibilities. Alice was determined to prove her worth. Not just to Victor. To herself. She had been waiting for the chance to lead this project. She refused to let conflicting feelings affect her performance. One day, while reviewing a detailed progress report, Alice received a notification from Ethan, "Can we talk tonight?" She hesitated for a few seconds before replying, "Yes. I need to sort some things out." Though she still felt hurt. Alice knew she needed clarity about the situation with Victor or Ethan. She knew that if she continued to keep her feelings bottled up, things would only get worse. Let's play a little game for those who read the comments. Type Coca progress report. Alice received a notification from Ethan. "Can we talk tonight?" She hesitated for a few seconds before replying, "Yes. I need to sort some things out." Though she still felt hurt. Alice knew she needed clarity about what was happening between her and Victor or Ethan. Whatever was happening had reached a point where keeping everything bottled up would only make things worse. Let's play a little game for those who read the comments. Type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now, let's continue the story. Later that afternoon, Victor sent a formal message requesting a meeting outside the office to discuss the project's progress. Alice found it odd but agreed. He scheduled the meeting at a quiet, private restaurant, which only piqued her curiosity further. When she arrived at the restaurant, Alice found Victor already seated at the table. His posture rigid but his eyes betraying a certain vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," he said. Standing up. "Greet her." "I thought it was important," Alice replied, trying to sound professional. Her voice showed her nervousness. They sat down. The waiter brought the menus. Neither seemed interested in eating. After a brief silence, Victor finally spoke. Alice. Before we discuss the project, I need to clear up a few things. She crossed her arms. Waiting. I lied about who I was when we started talking. Every word and every feeling I shared with you as Ethan was real. None of it was planned. I'm sorry for causing so much confusion. Alice looked closely at him, trying to see if he was being dishonest. You put me in a difficult position, Victor, she said. But at the same time, I can't deny how much our conversations meant to me. Victor nodded. His eyes showed he was being honest. I never wanted it to happen this way, Alice said. But honestly, I never imagined I'd meet someone like you. The silence that followed was almost tangible, heavy with emotions neither of them could fully express. Finally, Alice took a deep breath and asked, So, what happens now? Victor leaned forward slightly, his voice low but steady. I want to be honest with you. From now on, I want us to build something real. I understand it will take time. Alice felt the weight of his words and realized that, despite everything, there was still a part of her that wanted to believe. This will require a lot of effort, Victor. Trust isn't rebuilt easily. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, he responded without hesitation. In the following days, their relationship began to change. The interactions at the office became more natural. Victor was less forceful. He always supported Alice's work. In return, Alice started to feel more relaxed. During one of the final project reviews, Alice finally asked a question that had been on her mind. Why did you choose to give me this project? Victor smiled faintly, looking at her. Because I trust your talent. I wanted you to know that. Alice felt her cheeks blush slightly. She kept her composure. Thank you. That means a lot to me. When the big day arrived and the project was presented to the investors, the success was everyone was impressed with the new idea. Victor made sure to publicly recognize Alice's contribution. This project shows how talented and dedicated Alice Harper is. We couldn't have done this without her. Alice accepted the praise with humility. She felt proud of herself. After the presentation, Victor asked her to talk in private. I know things have been difficult between us. I want you to know that I'm here to make this work if you want to. Alice sighed, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. I want that too, Victor, she said. But we need to take it slow, Victor replied, smiling genuinely. Over the next few days, Alice and Victor started a new kind of relationship. One based on honesty and mutual respect. Despite the challenges, they were willing to face whatever came their way. One evening, while walking through the park, Victor took Alice's hand and said, I never imagined that a profile on a dating app would change my life this much. Alice chuckled softly. I never thought my boss would be the man who makes me laugh every night. They stopped. Victor pulled her into a hug. The silence between them was full of unspoken promises. The important thing is that we found our way together, he said. Alice smiled, finally feeling like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days leading up to the official completion of the project were exhausting but rewarding. Alice threw herself entirely into her work. Victor, always nearby, followed every step with meticulous attention. Success was palpable. The final presentation was the moment that made all their efforts worthwhile. That Friday morning, the entire team got together in the big conference room at Campbell Innovations. The investors waited with excitement as Alice made the final changes to the material that would be presented. Victor walked through the room, briefly speaking with some team members. His eyes frequently met Alice's, as if silently offering reassurance. When the moment for the presentation arrived, Alice took a deep breath and walked to the stage. The spotlight lit up her face. Her posture was firm. She began explaining the most important parts of the project. Victor watched from the side, impressed by the clarity and passion in Alice's presentation. He knew she was talented. That day she seemed unbeatable. Every word she spoke captivated the audience. When the presentation ended, the applause filled the room. "Excellent work, Ms. Harper," Victor said as he approached her after the meeting. His tone was professional. His eyes revealed something deeper. "You exceeded all expectations," he continued. Alice felt her face heat up. She kept her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Campbell. It was a team effort," she said. Victor smiled, satisfied. Later that day, he gathered the whole team for a small celebration on the company's rooftop. The panoramic view of the city was the perfect place to celebrate. "I want to thank everyone for working so hard on this project," Victor said as he raised his glass. "But I would like to thank Alice Harper in particular. Her leadership and creativity were very important." Everyone toasted. Alice, surprised by the attention, felt a bit nervous. The city was the perfect place to celebrate. "I want to thank everyone for working so hard on this project," Victor said. He lifted his glass. Then he wanted to thank Alice Harper in a special way. Her leadership and creativity were very important, he said. Everyone drank their drinks and Alice felt happy and proud. Sarah, who was standing next to her, quietly said, "He really admires you." "Oh. Really?" Alice said. She was thinking about something else. When the party ended, Victor asked Alice for a minute. "Do you have a minute?" he asked in a quiet voice. Alice stopped for a moment. Then, "I'm proud of you," Sarah whispered to Alice. "He really admires you," she added. "Who doesn't?" Alice replied, chuckling. She was thinking about something else. When the party ended, Victor approached Alice as she gathered her things. "Do you have a minute?" he asked in a softer tone. "Sure," Alice nodded. Victor led her to the rooftop, which was now empty but still illuminated by the city lights. He stopped near the railing and turned to face her. "Alice, I need to be honest. I've been thinking a lot about us." She crossed her arms, her heart racing. "And what have you concluded?" Victor took a deep breath before answering. "I want us to know exactly where we stand. I don't want there to be any doubts or misunderstandings between us." Alice remained silent, thinking about what he said. "I've been thinking, too," she said finally. "But there's still a lot I need to work through." Victor nodded, respecting the time she needed. "That's okay. I just want you to know. I'm here. I'm willing to wait." In the days that followed, Alice and Victor maintained a balanced working relationship. The emotional tension between them never fully disappeared. They both knew that eventually they'd need to address their feelings. One day, Victor sent Alice a message, "I need to show you something important. Meet me tomorrow night at this address." Alice read the message with curiosity and a twinge of anxiety. The next evening, she arrived at a small yet elegant restaurant with an intimate atmosphere. Victor was already there, waiting for her. What's so important?" Alice asked as she sat down. Victor gave a faint smile. He looked at her seriously. I want you to see another side of me. She raised an eyebrow. Intrigued. Before she could ask more, Victor began speaking about his personal life. He shared the pressures he'd faced from a young age. The constant need to prove himself. How he had avoided opening up to meaningful relationships for years. Then you came along, he said. Looking directly at her, you challenged me in ways no one else ever has. Alice felt a mix of emotions. Held his gaze steadily. And what do you expect from me now? Victor hesitated for a moment before replying. I hope we can build something real. No masks. No secrets. Alice took a deep breath. He felt the weight of his sincerity. It takes time and trust. That I'm willing to wait and earn your trust day by day. The dinner ended with a sense of relief for both of them for the first time. They felt they were on the right path. Even though they knew there was still a long way to go. In the weeks that followed, Alice and Victor, I've found a balance between work and our personal lives. We started spending time together outside the office. Sharing simple yet meaningful moments. Walks in the park. Quiet dinners. Movie nights at Alice's apartment. One day, during a walk, Victor stopped abruptly and looked at her. Alice. Have you ever wondered how things might have turned out differently between us? Maybe things would have been different if we'd met at a different time. She laughed softly. I think things would have been less complicated. Victor smiled. He looked serious. Maybe. But I believe everything happened the way it was meant to. Alice looked at him. Feeling that, despite the challenges, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next evening, Victor surprised her with dinner at his apartment. He had carefully prepared everything. From the food to the music playing in the background. I didn't know you could cook, Alice said. Impressed. I know a few things, he replied. Pouring her a glass of wine. Throughout the evening, the conversation flowed naturally. Alice felt the barriers between them finally beginning to disappear. Alice. I want you to know that I'm fully committed to you, Victor said. Taking her hand. Alice smiled. Feeling more secure than ever. And I'm committed too, Victor said. As time went on, they began making plans together. Though they kept things steady, both knew they were building something solid. At the end of a big work event, Victor made an unexpected. As time went on, they began making plans together. Though they kept things steady, both knew they were building something solid. At the end of a big work event, Victor made an unexpected announcement. I'd like to take this moment to thank everyone again for their incredible work. But personally, I want to thank someone special who has helped me grow. Not just as a leader. As a person. Alice Harper. You've changed my life. Alice was speechless. The applause and smiles from her colleagues encouraged her. After the event, Victor took her on a quiet walk under the stars. You know, I never imagined things would turn out this way. Announcement. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone again for their incredible work. Personally, I want to thank someone special who has helped me grow. Not just as a leader. As a person. Alice Harper. You've changed my life. Alice was speechless. The applause and smiles from her colleagues encouraged her. After the event, Victor took her on a quiet walk under the stars. You know, I never imagined things would turn out like this, he said thoughtfully. Neither did I. I'm glad they did, Alice replied. Holding his hand. They stopped and looked at each other for a long moment before Victor said, "Alice, I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. "This isn't a proposal. Not yet. But I want this to symbolize what we're building together." Alice felt the tears roll down her cheeks. As she smiled and accepted the ring, she said, "Thank you, Victor." They hugged. The world around them disappeared. The following months were filled with peaceful and happy moments. Alice and Victor had found the perfect balance at work and in their personal lives. Their relationship evolved naturally. The love they shared grew stronger each day. Victor, ever the observer, began planning something special. He knew Alice she was a unique woman. For a marriage proposal, nothing less than extraordinary would be enough. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked Alice, "What are your favorite places in the world?" Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical." Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening, but in his mind, a unique woman and a marriage proposal that was nothing less than extraordinary would be enough. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked Alice, "What are your favorite places in the world?" Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical." Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening, but in his mind, the plan was already taking shape. 2 months later, Victor surprised her with a trip. "Let's take some time off from work. Just the two of us." Alice was delighted by the idea. Victor kept the destination a secret until the moment of departure. When they arrived in Santorini, Alice was speechless. Victor said, "You deserve the best. I did bring us here." In the following days, they explored the island. A unique woman and a marriage proposal that was nothing less than extraordinary was needed. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked Alice, "What are your favorite places in the world?" Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical." Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening. In his mind, Victor was waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, one evening, he took her to a special dinner at a restaurant located on a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, creating a magical atmosphere. After dinner, as they walked along the terrace, Victor stopped and held Alice's hands. "Alice, you've changed my life in a way I never imagined. You've shown me that true love exists and that I can be a better person." Alice smiled, her eyes shining. "Victor, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me?" Alice felt the tears fall as she nodded in agreement. "Yes. Of course. Yes." Victor placed the ring on her finger and pulled her into a hug. As applause echoed around them, the entire restaurant had witnessed that special moment. A few months later, in a beautiful flower-filled garden, Alice and Victor got married in a small ceremony with family and friends. Alice wore a beautiful dress. Victor wore a well-fitted suit. He said, "You look amazing." When she arrived at the altar, she replied, You look perfect. The ceremony was emotional. They exchanged vows. A unique woman. For a marriage proposal. Nothing less than extraordinary would be enough. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked Alice, "What are your favorite places in the world?" Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical." Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening. In his mind, the vows. Both knew they were starting a new journey together, having already overcome the toughest challenges. When the officiant declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," everyone kissed the bride. Victor kissed her tenderly. The sound of clapping and laughter filled the garden. At the reception, while everyone celebrated, Alice and Victor shared a quiet moment alone under the stars. "You know, I never." A unique woman and a marriage proposal that was nothing less than extraordinary would be enough. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked Alice, "What are your favorite places in the world?" Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical." Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening. In his mind, he imagined her life would take this turn. "And I never imagined I would find love in such an unlikely place," Alice said, resting her head on a shoulder. "I know," Victor replied, holding her hand. They stood in silence for a few minutes, enjoying the moment. "From now on, it's you and me. Together in everything," Victor said. "Always," Alice smiled. So the journey that began with a message exchange on a dating app turned a unique woman and a marriage proposal that was nothing short of extraordinary was needed. One night, as they were having dinner, Victor casually asked Alice, "What are your favorite places in the world?" Alice smiled, intrigued by the question. I've always wanted to visit Santorini. The idea of a place with white houses and an amazing sunset seems magical." Victor simply nodded, as if he were just listening. In his mind, the story of Alice and Victor was already a true love story, showing that even the most unexpected paths can lead to happy endings. What did you think of Alice and Victor's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to follow all of our stories. Feel free to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the final screen.